Call the meeting to order. It's 1:01 on July 8th, 2020. So could you conduct a roll call?
Yes. Supervisor Brown?
Here.
Supervisor McCowan?
Here.
Chair Haschak?
Here.
Supervisor Jurdy?
Here.
And Supervisor Williams?
All right, I'm going to conduct the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so in order to speak via telecomment, one must submit a speaker form online before 8 a.m. the day of the meeting. The link to the telecomment request forms can be found on both the first and last pages of the meeting agenda and on the Board of Supervisors website under Agenda and Minutes and Public Engagement. If you have submitted a telecomment request for either public expression or consent calendar, please call in now. Okay. And I just have some information that I'd like to relay to everyone. One, about concerns about the ability to communicate and what the board is doing and what our staff is doing to try to make it better so that we can get public input on all these issues. So due to the coronavirus disease, COVID-19 public health emergency, the County of Mendocino has made several changes related to Board of Supervisor meetings to protect the public's health and prevent disease from spreading locally. Since California Governor Gavin Newsom issued Executive Order N-29-20 on March 17th, 2020, relating to the convening of public meetings in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Supervisors had been able to attend board meetings via teleconference or phone conference and have participated in the meeting to the same extent as if they were present. Additionally, the County of Mendocino has put in several options and resources to allow the public to participate in the meetings via teleconference. Due to the executive order to stay home, in-person participation at Board of Supervisors meetings has not been allowed. In order to allow for civic engagement, the public has been offered the following: call into Board of Supervisors meetings for public expression or agenda-specific public comment, submit a written comment via e-comment or via email, or watch a live broadcast. The county has historically broadcast via YouTube and Granicus via the county's website, and on Comcast channels 3, 64, and 65. However, these have been expanded to broadcasting live on Facebook to further the public's ability to watch live. In order to expand the public's ability to participate, there are several options currently being explored by the Executive Office and Clerk of the Board, including further expanding public participation in the live Zoom board meeting by attending the full meeting via a meeting invite with video turned off and attendees muted until called upon. Expanded phone conferencing feature that would allow attendance via phone for the entire meeting with attendees muted until called upon. And dedicated facility space made available in a county facility that would allow public expression via video conferencing. However, given the current state of the pandemic in Mendocino County, it is not anticipated that in-person meeting attendance will be considered until August. This will be contingent upon putting necessary safety measures in place and the status of the county's public health order. There is no immediate plan to open board chambers for public participation. However, staff are working on safeguards to protect the public as well as county staff in order to be prepared for eventual opening. This is no small undertaking given that the required 6 feet social distancing lack of available necessary protective supplies and/or resources, and the current restriction of the public health order regarding public gatherings and limitations on work teams or bubbles. It should be noted that all of these options are being entertained with the safety and well-being of our community and county staff in mind. While exploring the expanded public participation, it must also come with the understanding that the county's staffing resources have not expanded and are currently supporting the various Board of Supervisors meetings and additional support needs associated with COVID-19 pandemic, social distancing, and restricting working teams or bubbles, while also responding to the continued state of emergency and addressing the various mandated county operational obligations. So I hope that helps clear up the idea about what's been going on with public input and what we are trying to do to always improve it, dealing with this pandemic that we're in. So with that, I'm going to go on to agenda item number 3, public expression. I don't see any call-ins for public expression. Deputy Clerk of the Board, are there any that have come in?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to agenda.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you. At a previous meeting, it's been some time, you actually had the practice of asking that we at least acknowledge who had submitted public comment. And I do know we have some public comment that's been submitted and is actually attached to public expression. At a minimum, could we at least read off who has submitted public comment? That way the public at least knows that we are getting some public comment and we're acknowledging it. Thank you.
All right, so for public expression, we did have comments from Williamson, the Appalachians, Bailey, Reith, and Boyer.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. We also have a public expression comment from Heather Corral Rose.
Okay. Okay, and so those will be all on the Granicus attached to the agenda. Okay, very good. So moving on to agenda item 5A, which is discussion and possible action, including an update associated with the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, including possible direction regarding essential services in Mendocino County, operational preparation and response, and associated county-wide economic impacts.
I'm sorry, Chair Haschak.
Yes.
We have verbal comment, public expression from Heather Corral Rose. She's on the line.
She's on the line. Okay. Okay, so is she ready to go?
I am, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good.
So, Mr. Chair, Carmel and our Chief Executive Officer wanted me to provide, Heather Crow Rose, Senior Risk Analyst with your Executive Office, wanted me to provide an update on some of the security issues that we have had at the Administration Center. Recently, within the past week, this would be on Thursday before the 4th of July holiday, we had a threat to our staff who were guarding the entrance, that a threat alluding to gun violence, basically that one of the members of the public would come back with an AK-47 and take care of all of her problems. She apologized afterwards, but this was one of many in a long line of hostile incidents that the individuals who were working at the front counter have experienced during this crisis. We also had an incident the previous week where a member of the public had forced his way into the executive office when he was told that he needed to wear a mask and to call for an appointment. This is just kind of an ongoing issue we've had. The public is very unhappy. This crisis is affecting everybody, and government is really an easy target. So those staffers were, under so much abuse that we did lock down the administration center for now. It is, you can call to enter in for appointments. And we are in the process of getting a security guard, hopefully by Monday, to really kind of take the burden off staff who are not trained or, appropriately vetted to be able to handle these kinds of security issues and enforce these masking policies. They were just regular staff. And so we want to make sure that the board is aware that, it was for the protection of our staff that we had to kind of shut our doors for a while and regroup. Right now there is just a lot of unrest amongst the public. There's unrest amongst our staff. People are very uncomfortable. And right now we just need to take those extra precautions to protect our staff.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. All right. So continuing on with agenda item 5A, I'm going to pass this on to CEO Angelo.
Chair Hashtag, members of the board, thank you. As you know, I am home in quarantine, and so this is the first time that I have done this from my family room. So thank you for that. I will be in quarantine for another few days, and I will have a second COVID-19 test, and then I should be able to actually return to the office. This is part of the protocol that we are using to keep our staff and our members of the public that actually we serve, to keep them safe. So any county employee who leaves the county for over 24 hours, the direction to the department head is to work with that employee and have that employee work from home for 7 days. And if they are without any symptoms and they choose to take a COVID test, they may do so and then come back to work. So I will be taking my second test and hopefully getting out of quarantine within the next few days. So thank you. Today is a very brief update because this afternoon is around enforcement. And so I just want to say that we continue with our COVID experience, with our response. I'd like to say response and recovery, but we are still in a response mode, even though we start recovery from the minute we actually have an event. We continue to have our departmental operations center open. We continue to get results of our positive COVID tests throughout the county. We continue to keep track of those tests and to do contact tracing. Our Optum Serve is employees and testing capability is very robust, and our numbers are 132 a day, and we go over 132 every day. We continue to have Optum Serve at our fairgrounds here in Ukiah, and mainly because our community spread is here in Ukiah. We are continuing to test when we are aware of a positive COVID case, and we go ahead and we test those contacts. And that testing is usually outside of Ukiah in another area. So we have our Optum Serve that's doing surveillance testing and making the numbers. And we have our contact testing when we have a positive. Additionally, we have entered into an agreement with Consolidated Tribal Health. They are very good partners with us, and we are doing testing with them on the 101 corridor. So we do have surveillance testing going on. We have our contact testing, and we still rely on the hospitals and the clinics to test those people that are symptomatic, their patients, and those people that are sick. And so there is testing available throughout the county. Would we like more testing and quicker results? Absolutely. We are no different than any part of the state or, in fact, any part of the nation right now. If you're listening to national news, you are hearing about LabCorp and Quest, and that they are inundated and they are way behind in their test results. There was a time when you can get your test results in 2 to 4 days, and now it takes much longer. I am on day 8 waiting for the results of my first test, and I'm not alone with that. So we persist. Along with that, I have today with me Becky Emery, and Miss Emery is our director of our Department Operations Center. She is also in quarantine and working from home. And so Becky will be giving you an update on exactly where we are today with our COVID-19 response. So I would like to go to Becky, and after Becky, we have Deputy CEO Darcy Antle, who is our fiscal manager and has been responsible for the great work that she's done with getting us early money from FEMA and has been working with me and the state with our CARES Act funding. And so Becky will give you a brief update as well. We also do have Sheriff Kendall and our SIU Director, John Martyr, and our Code Enforcement Director, Trent Taylor, who will give a code enforcement update, very brief. And that is at the request of this board at the last meeting where this board asked for statistics of code enforcement, or basically public health order enforcement. So you will be hearing that too. So right now I would like to go to Miss Emery.
Thank you, CEO Angelo. Members of the board, Chair Hashcheck, my name is Becky Emery. I'm the DOC manager, and I appreciate the opportunity today to speak to you on the COVID-19 and our response in Mendocino County. We are currently at 103 cases. We have tested more than 12,000 people. And of those 103 cases, we have 11 new cases from yesterday. So we are having significant community spread as we're working through all of this and working with our community to ensure that we are providing excellent service and response timely in the manner needed to respond to the COVID-19 efforts. Today we had testing at Building Bridges. They were a great partner with us, as one of our positives from yesterday is related to services provided to our homeless community in the Ukiah area. They were very proactive in ensuring that they cleaned their entire facility just in case. Additionally, they scheduled the testing from 7 to 9 today to allow any of the individuals that had stayed at their facility to get tested just in case, as well as any staff, both within their facility as well as any homeless or community partners that serve these same individuals, so that we could, again, respond to this test. Now, what we have found so far is that proactively that test individual was not, they had outside contact, so it was not within that homeless community that they had that contact, but we are still working through all of those steps in the contact tracing. Our team worked very late into the evening yesterday and are continuing to be very diligent in both their case investigations of the initial positive cases as well as contact tracing. So one of the other situations that came up yesterday is that we do have a positive individual who works within one of our skilled nursing facilities. Again, based on the contact tracing and the hard work of our team, it was not related to any individuals within the skilled nursing facility at this time. However, that skilled nursing facility had a very quick and prompt response as well and has tested all of their staff and residents. So with those partnerings, we feel like we are responding quickly to community needs. We're working closely also with probation and trying to support our community and being proactive in any of those efforts, as many have heard of the early releases specifically around San Quentin and those challenges. And so we are putting together plans to have testing available and working closely with probation on responses to that in a proactive manner. And at this time, we do not have any of those releases. Additionally, we, as Carmel stated, are partnering with our clinics. We have 250 tests that are being worked out through the clinics all throughout South Coast, and they are coordinating that effort. It's part of the UCSF testing opportunity that we've been given through the month of July. And they will be scheduling those various tests that they'll be administering and then taking to UCSF. we are going to be getting that schedule, and we'll be sharing that both on our Facebook page with the community and with our call center so that people can call in and access that. I know that the clinics are also publicizing that event or those events throughout the month. And that's a great partnership for us, especially in our outlying areas where I know all of us have had concern. And the other thing, as CEO Angelo referred to, is the partnership that we have developed with Consolidated Tribal Health Project and testing there. We held our first event on the 27th and tested 267 people with that event, and then have 2 more scheduled already this week, one in Hopland on July 10th, and then second on July 11th in Willits. And those events are open to the public. And so we encourage people to come and get tested. And we really appreciate that partnership as we are working to help keep the community safe. And in addition to that, we continue to monitor all of our cases. I know that there has been additional requests as to data to be posted on the stat tracker. And so we are evaluating that. I know that 2 of the things that have been asked for is the symptomatic versus asymptomatic individuals, and also tracking of positive cases by region as they're occurring. So those are things that we have made a priority and are trying to figure out how can we make that easily accessible to the public and update our stat tracker with that type of information. We do not have that at this moment, but as I said, we are working towards that effort and have heard loud and clear from this board that that's a desired data point that you would like to have. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to CEO Angelo.
Thank you. So let me just turn this over to Deputy CEO Darcy Antle to talk about the funding, just to give the board a brief update on some of our funding. Darcy?
Good afternoon, Chair Hashak, member of the board. I am reporting to you today from the Annex building with my fiscal team. So some of us have relocated out of the executive office to provide for more social distancing and to comply with the order of Dr. Duhan and Carmel. So I am reporting it from here. This is my first attempt at managing this all alone in my space. So please bear with me where I share my screen. I do have a few slides for you. I believe the clerk of the board has uploaded those for you all to follow. Lindsay, are you seeing that?
It's been uploaded as an attachment, Darcy, yes.
Okay, how about now? Are we on screen? Yes.
Yes, you are on screen, yes.
Okay, so I have to, Chair Hashak, this is a very sobering report, at least for me, while pulling this all together for this update. And I work in the finance field and this disaster daily. We'll start out with our COVID contracts, total COVID contracts, excluding the hotel contracts, which we'll discuss shortly. So this is physicians, security, and some testing staff to date are at $3.3 million. Below, you see Project Room Key. This was the homeless effort to hotel individuals. You can see there we have this program took a change at the end of June, on June 30th. So the program changed to symptomatic homeless folks only. So you see we have terminated 73 rooms and we have retained 38 for an additional another week or so through 7/15. So if you can just follow with me for a minute. So basically right now we're sitting at 5.2 million in spend. So on the next slide, this is our Great Plates. This program we're hoping will extend, but at this point it's due to end on 7/10. We have 5 food providers involved in this great effort. We average about 299 participants throughout the program, and we're serving close to 38,000 meals, almost 39,000 to date. You'll note here at the bottom of the slide, we are looking for additional funding for this, and we will be routing contracts to this board for your approval on 7/14. And we are working closely with the state, Kelsey Rivera, and the HHSA team in hopes that this will be extended until August 10th. So my next slide, at week 7 of this event, I reported total hours of 25,000. Now at week 19, we are over 50,000 hours. There are a few employees that are not billing COVID hours as they are able to bill their current programs, and this is mostly through HHSA. So this number is higher than what we've put into this. So I think one point I would like to make, please note your employees are weary as in tired. We put a lot here, and we just need a little grace from everyone. We are still seeing an increase of hours, 2,000 per week, but overtime and CTO seem to have leveled off. With the surge that we're currently in and the additional testing, we will see these numbers increase. This is an estimate of $5.3 million for that slide. Next, this is a new slide that we've shared with you. This is a report out, and I believe it's in the CEO's report as well from HR, where we're tracking the folks that are currently out on leave, the emergency paid sick leave. We've had 20 people out and 20 return, so a total of 40 individuals have accessed this. This is basically up to 80 hours that folks can take off. And then we have the other leave for childcare reasons. This is gives folks time off for daycare, and you can see that that's at about 60 individuals that have used this fund. That's about a little over 10,000 hours, and that's an estimated cost of $1 million. So if you're keeping track with me at this point, we've spent about $11.8 million on the response, not including the loss of revenue. So total obligations from FEMA and CDAA to date is $1.2 million. You see the various projects that we have submitted for. These 4 projects have been obligated by the state for the $1.2 million and the feds, from FEMA and CDAA. We have not received those funds. The expense of these items is significantly higher. And what is not included in here is the large amount of testing response that we've had and what we are putting into the OptumServe, as well as the additional testing that Becky spoke of earlier. So this is estimated at an additional $1 million of the prior slide. So now we're looking at $12.8 million in spend. And then the loss of revenue for fiscal year 19-20 was about $2 million. And an additional $2 million, I believe, is what the auditor projected for fiscal year 2021. So now we are looking at about a $16.8 million fiscal impact. So on this slide, I would just like to take a moment to update you on the realignment backfill. I believe our original estimate of our loss in realignment funds was going to be about $8 million. We do have word that we are looking to receive about half of that back. We are concerned the first $3 million is through the state, and we would expect to see that The additional funds, the additional 1 million, is tied to the federal triggers, and we won't know that until October. So we're working very closely and following this money. And again, this realignment backfill is for our 4 programs, and it's spread out. This 3 million would be for human services, health, behavioral health, and public safety. So again, we're hoping to get that 3 million in the fall, early fall. The CARES Act, as you know, we're getting word and following with Carmel's Association and CSAC as well, that we're looking at 8.8 million. As you can see, this is a minor dent in the 16.8 million. And, saying that, we have a long way to go. With this surge and this event, we will continue to track these dollars so that we are able to recoup as much as we can. One caveat on the CARES Act, it cannot be used for loss of revenue. So we expect to have another report in front of you with regards to these 2 items, 7/21, so that's July 21st board meeting. And then there's also a focus from the government, from our governor, regarding law enforcement and some additional funds coming that way. I'm not sure if that's 100% clear and those dollars are out there. I believe the SO can speak to that. I think they've received like 67,000 to date, but I think there's some additional revenue that may be coming into them to help with enforcement. So with that, CEO Angelo and Chair Hashak, that concludes my report.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to Sheriff Kendall, John Mateer, and Trent Taylor for the code enforcement update. Who would like to start?
Well, I can certainly begin. I've got a few notes here. So basically, we've had, prior to the May 15th changeover from an EOC to a Department Operations Center, we had about our 214s revealed about 618 contacts regarding the sheltering in place. Following that time, I had roughly 3 bailiffs, 3 deputy sheriffs that were using court security that we had freed up because the courts were not running at the same speed that they normally would. From about June 5th to present, we had approximately 57 contacts. 1 person was issued the notice of violation for the non-facial covering for the civil regulatory portion of it. We have received some grant funding for the COVID-19 gear, the face masks, the hand sanitizer, things like that. It was roughly $70,000 for the PPE. I don't believe that we've seen anything from the state yet for enforcement dollars. And so I'm certain that we're currently working on that. But as far as the protective gear and whatnot goes, we have received some funding on that.
All right. Thank you. John Martyr. Sion or Trent Taylor.
Hi, this is Trent Taylor. I chair Hashak and members of the board and staff. Trent Taylor, Code Enforcement Manager, Planning and Building Services. My statistical information as requested by the CEO actually got published under item 5B, but I can do a brief analysis right here. To date, Code Enforcement has investigated about 90 health order complaints as of last Sunday. We've gotten some more this week. As of Sunday, we had 4 still under investigation and 86 have been resolved with compliance achieved. Mostly are investigations are a little more comprehensive, dealing with business owners and property owners over vacation rentals and lodging. And that's been our primary focus from code enforcement. All of our complaints are derived through the call center, and we respond accordingly. 72 of our complaints were on the coast, 18 have been inland. We have 40 complaints that were related to retail businesses, 49 related to vacation rentals, and one that was related to a hip camp situation, which was camping on private land. We issued 2 notice of violations, both to the same restaurant establishment on the coast, and that establishment was ultimately put in citation and is pending a $10,000 fine, and the business subsequently closed after that citation. I also have, I've requested that interim or acting code enforcement supervisor John Burks be on this call and the next item in case you have any questions. He logs in, administers, and assigns all of our complaints as they come in, and he's quite busy doing that. And if the board has any questions of him or I, we're open to questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So, John Burks, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing to add at this moment.
All right. And is John Martyr on the line?
This is John Martyr from SIU. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. I'd be happy to answer specific questions, Mr. Chairman and board. I can tell you SIU is the triage center for the calls for service that we receive from the call center. And then we either investigate those or direct them to the city code enforcements or our county code enforcement officers for further follow-up. And our calls for service have been going down. In April, we received 70 calls. In May, we received 69 calls. And in June, we received 52 calls. And I have a lot of statistics for different geographical areas of the county. I don't want to give you a whole bunch of numbers, but I'd be happy to answer any specific questions, Mr. Chairman, that you might have or other board members may have at this time. We continue to staff this response Monday through Friday, and I have investigators that are on call 24/7 on the weekend hours to respond to any complaints or handle any calls or requests. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Okay, we're going to open it up for board questions at this moment. So, and if you've submitted any public comments, please call in now. So, Supervisor Brown.
No comment at this time or questions. Thank you.
All right, Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have quite a few questions. Maybe you could come back to me and maybe many of my questions will be asked by my colleagues.
Okay. All right, we'll go to Supervisor Jurdy.
Yeah, so I have a budget question for Darcy, and I'll probably ask you a question that's it's probably impossible to answer. But if you don't have it now, if you could be working on this, you've given us a broad outline of $16 million outlay by the county and $8.8 million in the CARES funds, but then we're also applying for reimbursement for certain expenses. Obviously, there's going to be some gap between the reimbursements and the outlays. And that's what we hope that the 8.8 million will cover. But is there a way that you could develop some sort of target that shows, if this goes on for another 8 months, another 12 months, will the 8.8 be enough to fill the gap?
I certainly, good afternoon, Chair Hashak, through the chair to Supervisor Jurdy. Certainly I can work on that for you. Yes, I'll have that for you either on the 14th or the 21st, depending on your agenda.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Supervisor Williams.
No questions.
No questions? All right. So I had a question for Deputy CEO Antle. Is that with that 16.8 we've been spending and the 8.8 from the CARES Act, it seems like all that CARES Act money, because, well, we have 11.8, there's just a lot of money being spent, that CARES Act money will be taken up already. And it's could be committed already.
Supervisor Hashak, it sure looks like that. We do need to continue to look at the CARES Act and what those dollars are can be utilized for. One thing is very clear: it can't be to backfill our revenue. So we do know that there's going to be a revenue gap, and we would be looking at it to fill in other things that we can't bill FEMA for. So we got an avenue of FEMA, but then we have a big gap where FEMA doesn't fill, and obviously we're responsible for 25%, our local match when it comes to FEMA.
And when you were talking about the hours, the 52,000 hours plus of overtime, and then the emergency paid leave, another 10,000 hours, are those hours reimbursable by FEMA?
No, the FEMA only reimburses our overtime hours, and they reimburse no overtime for someone at the role of myself or other supervisors, or CEO Angelo. Certainly, none of her time can be billed to FEMA. So those dollars are all lost. We are to absorb those hours at our level. Folks that are below managers, we can bill their overtime hours. But the regular time that this county has put into this project, regular hours, cannot be billed to FEMA.
And then the emergency paid leave is not reimbursable.
The emergency paid leave is not reimbursable. We are looking to see if my understanding is the CARES Act does reimburse that, but I'm not 100% confident in that. We have an additional session on CARES Act on Monday, I believe.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Chair Hashak.
Yes,
this is CEO Angelo. If I could just add to that, I would like to say that what we know about the CARES Act, and we will get confirmation on Monday, but we should get 2 months worth of CARES Act money. They're not giving us all the dollars to the counties, and the small counties like ours, it's about 1.3 billion that's split. And then of course the cities are getting 500 million, so they're getting their own money. But what we know is that the CARES Act dollars will be based on compliance. I think we are sitting in a good position around compliance of all of our metrics with our attestation, and certainly with the assistance of what's happening with enforcement at this point. But that money is all contingent upon compliance. And then I also want to say that over the last few meetings, this board has asked about the spending, and there have been comments by some of the supervisors about reducing the money that is spent on COVID. And with that, we have attempted to reduce down our staff that are involved with the COVID response. It's difficult when we are doing as much testing as we are, and there is still more testing that's needed and wanted. Additionally, we have trained contact tracers. And when you think about how we've gone from 50 to 103, that is a lot of contact tracing. There are a lot of contacts that we need to find and determine if they need to be quarantined as well. So I put in a second request for mutual aid, which is for additional contact tracers from the state. And as you may know, the state trained 8,000 employees in contact tracing. So I put in a request for 10 additional contact tracers through mutual aid. 5 bilingual and 5 not bilingual. And so we'll see if we get those. But what the point I want to make is, since we're focused on the money, is that we're doing everything we can to watch the spending and reduce the spending. But when our numbers are jumping and our cases are all over the county, not just in one area, it's very difficult to reduce staff time. So I just want to make sure this board knows I heard you and we're trying, but we can't weigh reducing staff versus not responding to a positive COVID. So that's where we are. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a question for Becky Emery about the consolidated tribal health testing. And you said that it would be on July 11th in Willits. Where will that be? Are you there, Becky?
Yes, sorry. So in Willits, it will be at the Sherwood Valley Tribal Office on
Okay.
July 11th from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m.
So 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. on the 11th, and that's open to everybody.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All
Thank
right,
you.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up a bit on the CARES Act, and I believe we will have an agenda item for that on July 21st to be able to go more in depth.
Correct. Yes, that's the goal right now is July 21st. Yes, your schedule for the 14th is full.
And then I believe as part of the CARES Act, there's also some community development block grant funding that would come to the county, and approximately $290,000 in that range. Do you know, is that part of the $8.8 million? Is that the total Mendocino County share of the CARES Act?
Through the chair to Supervisor McCowan, I believe that's a separate pot, but I would want to look into that further.
And then there is an application period for that. So, you know, at least by our next meeting, and maybe you know now if we have already applied for that funding.
Darcy Antle, Deputy CEO, through the chair, Supervisor McCowan. I do not know if we have, but I will certainly follow up.
Great, thank you. And then this, you know, I don't want to put a lot of burden on staff, but if the information is readily available about the total amount of CARES Act funding allocated to the county, it, I think, would be good information to put out to the public, because we know there were multiple categories of funding. So to counties, of course, to cities, to tribal governments, to health clinics, hospitals. So again, if that info is readily available, I don't want it to be a research project, but if we are able to obtain that info, I would appreciate having that, being able to put it out to the public. In terms of the testing with Consolidated, I just wanted to make the point, because we are doing this in partnership with Consolidated, which we very much appreciate, but the public needs to understand these funds are within the control of Consolidated Tribal Health, and I believe they are specifically for testing along the 101 corridor. Is that accurate?
Darcy Antle, Deputy CEO, through the chair. Becky may still be on mute, but yes, it's the 101 corridor. I think we go Laytonville, Willits, and then Hopland, Redwood Valley, Hopland. Yeah.
Thank you. And then we know there's been significant new cases, hospitalizations, fatalities in Sonoma County, also in San Quentin. There is a lack of hospital beds in Sonoma County, or they're certainly, scrambling to find beds. San Quentin, the same thing. They're hospitalizing some of their people who are ill. What's the prospect that some of those cases may come to Mendocino County? Can anyone speak to that?
Chair Haschak, this is CEO Angelo. I would like to answer Supervisor McCowan's question. We had a call with, we don't know today. That's the best answer I can give you. However, we spoke with Sonoma County last week and spoke with Sonoma County yesterday, and we will be having a call with them weekly to talk about their capacity, our capacity. Right now, the San Quentin positive inmates are first go to contracted hospitals. So that's why Marin got them, of course, the close proximity as well, and Sonoma County. We would get COVID positive San Quentin inmates in our hospitals really as a last resort. And we had the communication with our hospitals. I spoke with Jason Wells about this, so we would know. What we have been told is that they would show up. They would show up within a couple hours. So right now, we have no knowledge of any COVID positive sick inmates that would be coming into our hospitals right now. And with Sonoma County, they are looking for additional resources to place some of their people that need an alternate care site. But as of last night, they were working also with Senator McGuire to find another site within Sonoma County. So we are good partners with them. We're doing everything we can to work together, Sonoma, Mendo, and Lake, but no one has additional resources right now. But if we are aware of any of the San Quentin inmates coming here that are sick and will enter our hospitals, or any of the COVID positive patients from other counties, we certainly will let this board know. Right now, everybody knows there's not one county that is sitting with additional resources. So thank you. I hope I answered your question.
All right, Supervisor McCowan, is that it then?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do, and thank you, CEO Angelo. I do have a follow-up on that. So if people are transferred here from another county and, unfortunately die, then we have this issue of where are deaths recorded to where are they attributed, where they originated, or where they wound up. And I think the state has not been entirely clear on that, but I think there would be a value in trying to really determine exactly how does that reporting and recording system work, and then perhaps update our online tracker so that these things are accurately shown. So that's just a comment. We know the recent controversy over our tracker, and I'm confident staff is working to clarify those issues. I did have one question also with the potential early releases from San Quentin. And will we have the ability to require that any early releases from San Quentin back to Mendocino County be quarantined for the appropriate period of time? Can we require that?
Chair Haschak, I would like to first start with that to respond to Supervisor McCowan's question, that is a very good question. Sheriff Kendall called me yesterday with actually this issue. And what we decided, and I spoke with Dr. Duhan after my call with Sheriff Kendall, is that we needed to get the information on these 11 early releases, when they would get here. Sheriff Kendall had, and I don't want to speak for him, and I'm sure he'll comment on this, but basically we know 11 early releases per the sheriff. They should be coming within the next 2 weeks. And what we agreed to is that public health would do everything we could to get the information as to who, what, where, when, as well, and work with the sheriff. And that when we know who the inmates are or the early releases and they get here, that we would go ahead and quarantine them. Obviously, check them for symptoms and quarantine them and ask them to test. So we have a facility that we could put them in, or we could put them in hotels. So if they don't have a home to go to or a place that they could quarantine. So we are working with Sheriff Kendall, and I spoke with Senator McGuire about this last night and asked for the senator's help in getting us the information, as we know that inmates have been released into counties without any warning or any information coming forward. We have a call today at 3:00 that the undersheriff will be on, the chief probation officer will be on, and my staff will be on. That is a call with CDCR to talk about those early releases. So the way that we have it set up, unless somebody tells us legally we can't do this, and nobody has told us that so far, is one, we get the information as to who's coming into our county as an early release, when they're going to get here. We find out, we meet with that person, find out if they are symptomatic. If they are, they get tested immediately, go into isolation. If they're not, we believe that we can quarantine them for 14 days, or at least ask them to quarantine and ask them to test. And that is the information that I have based on my conversation with Sheriff Kendall, conversation with Senator McGuire, direction from our health officer, Dr. Duhan, and we'll know more after our call today. And I would ask Sheriff Kendall if he has anything he'd like to add to that.
Thank you, CEO Angelo. Chair Haschak, members of the board. So I spoke with our Chief Probation Officer, Locatelli, yesterday. And one of the things that we're trying to do, basically exactly as the CEO has informed you, is we need to know where, when, and how these folks are going to be released. Chief Locatelli explained to me that he could possibly put into their probation orders that upon release, they will report to probation, they will submit to a test, and they will quarantine until such time the test results are returned. Some people will be released on the PRCS, or the post-release community correction system, and those are a little more simple. Some will be released on parole, and so we have to work with parole as well to make sure that we can get these little hurdles behind us. If we can get, especially, we know that we're going to have 3 coming out of San Quentin, and San Quentin is currently a big hotspot. But if we can test all that get out and be able to get them to shelter in place, if they don't have residences and we don't feel confident that we can watch that, then we can make it a term of their probation. We're hoping at this point. I'm certain that the parole officers will work well with us. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor McCowan, did you have anything else?
Yes, I did have one more. The skilled nursing facility, obviously, high level of concern, and I've seen, and heard from some members of the public expressing a lot of doubt about the county's ability to respond to that. And it's obvious that some of the public hasn't been following what's going on, because from day one, from the very first case, the county has done extensive contact tracing and investigation, and I think has done a great job on that. And of course, with a skilled nursing facility, I'm sure that our staff, as well as their staff, would have been even more diligent. And as we have heard, all the residents were tested, all the staff were tested. We're doing the contact tracing to identify any close contacts with the person who tested positive. And I just wondered, is there anything that either CEO Angelo or Becky Emery to add to that to assure the public that we're doing everything we can to stay ahead of that situation?
Chair Haschak, I really think Becky could answer this. I want to say that there's such a great team, as Supervisor McCowan spoke about from the get-go, as evidenced by the $16 million that we're spending. You know, we are not sparing any expense to try to protect the public's health. So I would like to ask Becky to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, if I may. Supervisor McCowan, I really appreciate the outline that you've given of the work that our team has done. The other thing I would include there is that we have weekly calls with our skilled nursing facilities. We talk about what their plans are. We talk about what each of them are doing as best practices. We do regular check-ins into the amount of personal protective equipment that they have available and the utilization that they have and their practices in that. The skilled nursing facilities in Mendocino County have done a tremendous job of keeping our community and the people that they are serving, their residents, extremely safe. I know it's been very challenging for many of our community members to maintain contact with their family members that are in the skilled nursing facilities, but it's really been a proactive effort that the skilled nursing facilities have done to ensure the safety and well-being of their residents in our community. I really appreciate the outreach that they have provided and that they reached out to us immediately to coordinate and do testing, both of their residents and their staff. So I really want to commend the facility and appreciate their partnership.
Thank you. And there's just one more issue that I did want to raise, Mr. Chair. We have several communications from the Mendocino wine growers, from the Willits Chamber of Commerce, Greater Fort Bragg Chamber of Commerce, or Mendocino Coast Chamber of Commerce, rather, the Greater Ukiah Business and Tourism Alliance. And they're all asking for a modification to the attestation that businesses are required to sign as part of the self-certification. And it includes a particular sentence where they're explicitly acknowledging the risk of negligence that they face in reopening. And this acknowledgement doesn't change state law. It does kind of wave a red flag. And I'm aware of businesses, and we've been told by the public correspondence, there are businesses that will not complete the self-certification process because of this. And I understand from communications with County Council, the concern is that we want to make sure that businesses are taking this process seriously, that they're taking compliance seriously, and that they're aware that there could be consequences beyond what we may be able to impose through enforcement. And I think there's a very simple way to do that, and it would simply involve adding one additional phrase to the end of the next to the last sentence, where it says that there could be other legal consequences we could add, including potentially from third parties. And I think that would adequately put people on notice. So, I'd like to hear from County Council on, would that be an acceptable alternative to the current statement that people are objecting to?
County Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Supervisor McCowan, for bringing this up. This is actually something that had come up at a prior board meeting where there had been a question about whether or not the statement was intended to modify existing law or simply to warn the public about the potential consequences for not just for reopening, but specifically for reopening in a way that would fail to comply with the safety requirements that were in the orders. Essentially the guidances that are imposed by the state, the particular requirements in the orders, the things that have to be done in order to make sure that the business reduces the risk that transmission of the virus will occur at their place of business. And as I mentioned at that time, the language was not intended to modify underlying liabilities. It was intended just to put those businesses on notice. And so to give a little bit of background here, Dr. Duhan had actually asked, when she created the self-certification process, she had asked for some language that we could potentially insert into the form that would put the businesses on notice that there was a risk of civil liability, and in particular the risk of civil liability because of the fact that early on in this process we had seen indications that there had been some businesses that simply would be willing to pay a fine or that wouldn't be complying with any of the requirements that might impact their bottom line unless and until enforcement were to actually show up. And so by mentioning the possibility of civil liability, it was to try and impress upon them the importance that even if there wasn't someone looking over their shoulder, there was a need for them to be complying with these safety requirements, and that there could be consequences for failing to do so. Now, I will say we did make an earlier modification to this language to try and clarify that this wasn't a modification of state law, and unfortunately that doesn't seem to have cut down on the confusion as much as we had hoped. I actually have alternative language that we've been working on right now that we're in the process of trying to get up there. I will say the language that Supervisor McCowan mentioned to simply say from third parties, I don't know that that accomplishes the goal that Dr. Duhan had been looking for and that she had requested when she asked us to craft this language in the first place. But we have been working on something that would be a bit clearer, that would not imply in any way that there was a modification to existing law or that this is potentially any sort of strict liability type standard. I think one of the comments that came in from one of the business associations was that it was an oversimplification of the law of negligence per se. I will say, since it was one sentence, it was certainly a simplification, but we really want to make sure that it's accurate, that it's accomplishing the goal that Dr. Duhan has asked for, which is to make sure that these businesses are aware that failing to follow the rules might have civil consequences and consequences for civil liability, while at the same time not misleading any of the businesses or not indicating somehow that it's more serious than it is.
Well, couldn't that simply be accomplished by another slight modification to what I suggested and say, including potentially from suit for civil liability from third parties? Because part of the objection is the phrasing of the current sentence, that they may be committing negligence per se. It's like waving a red flag. And the idea that we need to put people on notice, the fact that we're now talking about people who have refused to certify because they're concerned that the language, although it doesn't change law, may heighten their exposure by highlighting the issue of negligence. They're very well informed of the liability. That's exactly why they're objecting to completing the self-certification process. So I think if we, can tone this down so that they're acknowledging the risk of civil liability, but leave it in broader, more general terms, maybe that's a reasonable compromise.
County Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly understand Supervisor McCowan's point. The language that we've worked out and which we're hoping to update shortly is not quite as limited, but it also is not mentioning negligence per se, and is trying to, I will say, walk the line between these two sort of competing goals. The primary goal is to be accurate, to make sure that no one is misled. But at the same time, I understand that there is a concern coming that the businesses are effectively deterred by the risk of liability. But at the same time, the intent of the statement, as it had been requested of us, was to get something that would cause these businesses to be concerned and to take this seriously, if you will.
Well, and my final comment, and thank you, County Council, but the health orders obviously are strictly within the purview of the health officer, and they will say what she approves. The self-certification in terms of what these businesses must do, the actions they must take in order to open, I would think are also within the purview of the health officer. But when it comes down to this level of legal detail of putting them on notice, that's not really in the realm of public health. It's more just a legal question. And so what is the legal authority or the legal justification that we point to include this statement? Since it doesn't in any way change state law, it doesn't change their liability. What's the legal authority for forcing them to make this acknowledgement?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
To respond to Supervisor McCowan's comment, so the health officer does have the authority as part of this process to be implementing, the various orders, and one of her orders and the way it was structured was specifically to require those businesses that were opening to certify that they had taken the appropriate steps and that they had gone through certain processes. And that is within the scope of the health officer's authority to go ahead and to do that, and to require them to go ahead and take these steps. One of them simply being that they have attested that they have in fact read that statement and understood it. And I think what Supervisor McCowan might be getting to is not just the question of sort of, I will say the authority of whether or not to require someone to attest that they have in fact read that statement before they reopen falls within the realm of the health officer. I will say that the question of the accuracy of the statement is fundamentally a legal question. I don't know that I would say that the statement was as written initially inaccurate, but it sounds like it may have caused some confusion. It may have caused some people to think that it was saying things that it wasn't, and certainly we don't want that. So we have been asked to draft revised language. I understand Supervisor McCowan has his own language that he's suggesting, but I'm going to go ahead and provide the language as requested for the health officer for the modification to the form. We will make sure that it is in fact legally accurate, and hopefully it will be striking sort of the balance of tone that I think the board and the health officer have both indicated some desire for. Thank you.
Thank you. Final comment, perhaps take a half hour or an hour and work with the industry, supply them with your draft revised language, see if there can be a meeting of the minds. And I think if there can be, that'd be the best resolution. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. And my question to County Council following up is, are we going to be able to see those? What's the communication going to be about that revised language?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We may be able to share some draft of what we've worked out just now. If the board would like, we may be able to I'm just, sorry, I'm messaging with one of my deputies right now, and I think we may have it ready enough to be able to just share with the board and let the board understand what it is. So if the board wants to take just a few minutes, we may be able to actually upload that as a document and let the board take a look.
All right, that sounds great. We have public comment. If we're done with the questions from the supervisors, we have public comment. We can go to that, and then we will come back to you, County Council. Okay, so going to public comment, is Bernadette Byrne on the line?
Who?
Yes.
Who?
Okay,
Bernadette Byrne.
okay.
Yes, I am here.
Ms.
Can
Byrne?
you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, state your name.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair Hashak. My name is Bernadette Byrne, and I am the Executive Director of the Mendocino Wine Growers. Mendocino Wine Growers first off wants to thank the Mendocino County Executive Office and our county supervisors for your efforts to allow and facilitate our businesses to reopen in a safe and responsible manner during this pandemic. We find that the county Safe Business Operations Protocol or checklist to be very practical and useful, and we appreciate the concept of self-certification as a condition of reopening. The issue that we and many other business organizations have is with the language of the self-certification. We find this sentence language to be problematic. Quote, in particular, any business that violates the health officer's orders, risks committing negligence per se, may expose itself to civil liability for all damages created by any viral transmission that occurs at their place of business, end quote. We request that this sentence be removed from the self-certification. This current language adds unnecessary risk and liability for our businesses. We are concerned that the certification language goes beyond applicable law, and in doing so may invite litigation. Some of our members are not reopening because of the language of this liability clause. The issue of frivolous lawsuits in the new COVID-19 world is a serious threat to all of our businesses. In fact, the threat is so grave that the California Travel Association is currently asking Congress for temporary protection from business liability for organizations and businesses that follow proper health and safety guidelines and are compliant with local, state, and federal guidelines. The Mendocino Wine Growers and our partner business organizations here in Mendocino County are concerned about undue liability for our business during this COVID pandemic, and we believe the current language in the self-certification puts our businesses at risk unnecessarily for lawsuits. If Mendocino County businesses take the necessary steps to protect the health of our customers and employees, it is necessary to allow them to reopen with confidence. We really realize that many of our county businesses have completed the current self-certification and agreed to the current liability clause, but we believe that this has been done under financial duress as they urgently need to reopen. In summary, we request that the problematic sentence from the liability clause be removed from the self-certification. This will be critical for giving businesses the confidence that they need to resume operation. I'm very interested to hear the revised language coming from County Council. I thank you very much for your time and your work to support our businesses during this challenging time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Byrne. We'll see if this language comes back as acceptable.
Chair Haschak, I have a question for County Council.
Yeah, Supervisor Williams.
Yeah, County Council, if we were to strike this language entirely, would it have any impact on the liability businesses assume in reopening?
No, it would not.
Okay, moving on with Katrina Essen.
Oh, if I may, Mr. Chair, just one more. The issue of, with the new revised language, whatever it proves to be, I assume that businesses who had previously certified would be allowed to recertify using the new language. Would that be accurate?
County Council?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Sorry. The question is whether the businesses that had previously certified would be able to recertify I don't believe that there would be any obstacle to them recertifying. I also don't know that there's particularly any reason for them to do so.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll continue on with public comment. Katrina Kesson. Ms. Kesson.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Katrina Kesson, Executive Director of the Greater Ukiah Business and Tourism Alliance. And I'm speaking on behalf today of the businesses and communities that we serve. And we are here to voice our support for the effort put forth by the Mendocino wine growers to modify this language. In note of the comments that have come in following my chance to speak, I would just like to say that I am looking forward to seeing a swift revision and resolution. Thank you so much for all your effort.
All right, thank you. Mr. David Gurney.
Mr. Gurney's no longer on the line.
Okay, so we'll go back to County Council. Are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the modified language that we proposed would read, in particular, any business that fails to implement the COVID-19 protection measures required under the local orders risks exposing itself to civil liability for negligence if employees or customers become sick as a result.
All right. Could you repeat that, please, one more time?
Certainly, and I'll just note, I believe it's been uploaded to the item as well. I'll let you know there was one earlier change. Perhaps it'd be easier if I just read the entire statement. So the statement in its totality reads, all individuals and businesses must follow county and state health officer orders, which are issued under the authority of California law. As a condition of operating, current orders require, among other things, local business compliance with state and local industry-specific guidance and submission of self-certification forms. State statute explicitly provides that health officer orders may be enforced by the local sheriff or other peace officers of the county. Violation of the orders may subject a person or business to criminal or civil penalties, as well as other legal consequences. In particular, any business that fails to implement the COVID-19 protection measures required under the local orders risks exposing itself to civil liability for negligence if employees or customers become sick as a result.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any questions or comments about that?
Well, again, Mr. Chair, I would suggest working with the industry, with the business groups, and see if there can be some mutually acceptable language. As brought out by Supervisor Williams' comment, simply deleting that sentence at all doesn't change existing law, doesn't change their level of liability, and anyone objecting to that sentence is already very aware of the liability and the seriousness of this. So it's a real open question if that sentence is needed at all. But if you do want something that causes them to acknowledge their civil liability, you could put a period after civil liability and mission accomplished. I think the current revised draft probably will inspire the same concerns as the current sentence does. So I don't think it's really allayed their concerns in any way. But again, you know, if it's thought to be necessary at all, I do encourage working with the industry, perhaps with the ad hoc, and see if something mutually acceptable can be worked out. Thank you.
And County Council, where can that be found? It was uploaded already?
Oh, I'm sorry. We sent it to the clerk of the board. I don't know that it's prepared to be uploaded just yet. I'm getting an indication that maybe that step's taking a little bit of time.
Okay.
Okay. So my apologies. I spoke too soon on that front.
Okay. Any other comments about this? Hearing none, we'll move on. So that's it for item 5A then. So we'll move on to item 5B, if that's all right. Okay, item 5B.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, so we do have newly uploaded documents with some revisions that were made in response to the district attorney. I'm looking at version 2, the red line, and it's not clear from that to me what changes, if any, have been made. So as part of the presentation, unless there's some place I can be directed to where I can clearly see the changes, perhaps County Council can highlight those as they present the item. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair?
Okay. Yes, Supervisor Brown.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to thank the public for all the correspondence that they've sent in. And I'm sorry that the one gentleman wasn't able to speak during public expression. Truly, I do appreciate being able to hear all their concerns and read them before the meeting. Thank you.
Okay. And with that, we do have David Gurney on the line. So, Mr. Gurney.
Yes, can you hear?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to know why our public health officer is in San Diego instead of on duty here in Mendocino County. As a taxpayer, I have to demand that county officials live and work in county, not in some remote part of the state 600 miles away. Dr. Doohan reports to us weekly via Zoom using expressions like, "We here in Mendocino County have to do better," and so forth, pretending like she's in county when by now everybody knows she is not. I was informed by the call center this morning that the state appointed another interim public health officer to assist our absent Dr. Doohan. This person was apparently hired a week or two ago, but no announcement, as far as I know, was made by the county. This is not transparency. I further want to complain about the general incompetence and neglect in the county's reaction to this pandemic. The Public Health Department issues its updates via Facebook and a clunky website. Facebook is an untrustworthy app at best that many people have refused to use and many others have recently deleted. Having your primary information channel a Facebook page is not only unprofessional, it's irresponsible and negligent. If you look at every other county in Northern California, and I've looked, Humboldt, Del Norte, Sonoma, Marin, Napa, Lake, any county will have separate links on their webpage with graphs, statistics, dashboard, and data, all laid out very clearly and transparently. Meanwhile, Mendocino has a dark, black, jumbled, and inarticulate dashboard on Facebook, along with a 7-line, 30-word paragraph for basic statistics that appear sporadically on their website. This is unacceptable. Worse, the Public Health Department has so far misleadingly and falsely reported on at least 2 cases in this pandemic. Our county experienced its first death on July 1st. State law requires that a death be declared by the attending physician, the cause of death, within 15 hours. Yet our Public Health Department has not only failed to list this as a COVID death, it also unbelievably has listed this deceased man as recovered. A visiting nurse who tested positive in Fort Bragg but lives in Oregon was similarly wiped from the county's public records on COVID-19. Again, I have to ask, where is the testing on the coast? Fort Bragg did 200 tests in all of June. This county has run out of excuses for not getting even the bare minimum of tests needed on the coast. Finally, this board needs to order wastewater testing for the town of Mendocino and other incorporated towns and communities in our county. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gurney. Seeing no questions, I will, let's see. We'll move on. Okay, so your voice was heard. Okay, agenda item number 5B. Discussion and possible action, including adoption of an urgency ordinance, amending ordinance number 4461 regarding administrative penalties for COVID-19 related violations and establishing an infraction violation regarding COVID-19 related facial covering requirements. County Council is the sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. And I would just like to note, I believe the Sheriff's Office is a co-sponsor on this item, so I want to make sure that I provide them an opportunity to provide any information to the board as well. What's before you and Supervisor McCowan?
County Council, could I interrupt for a sec?
Yeah, sorry.
Could everyone please mute if you're not speaking? Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will let the board know that earlier today, as Supervisor McCowan referenced, we did upload a slightly modified version of the proposed ordinance. DA Eister was kind enough to provide some feedback. The changes, I would say, are smaller overall, but they were good notes, so we have incorporated them in an updated draft. I'd be happy to walk you through those, but first I'd just like to give you some of the basics with respect to the ordinance that's in front of you and the issues that's intended to address. As you will recall, this board previously at the end of March enacted ordinance number 4461, which provided administrative penalties for violations of the health officer order. Since that time, so that was actually before the facial covering orders had been in place. Since that time, there have been facial covering orders issued both by the local health officer and by the state, and this is an issue that's become sort of an increasing emphasis as we have reopened. And as part of that, there have been some questions regarding sort of the practical issues related to enforcement and how to apply the orders for the facial coverings. And I will just note this is distinct from the medical masking orders, which applies in specific medical settings and applies to materials that are of a more protective nature than the facial coverings. So the Sheriff's Office had asked about the possibility of creating an ordinance that would make a violation of the facial covering order an infraction. The ordinance that you have in front of you proposes a number of changes. One of them is simply to establish a separate offense. So this would not be limited purely to a violation of the health officer orders, but would rather make it a separate offense as an infraction to fail to wear a facial covering under certain circumstances after being warned by an enforcement officer. There are some corresponding changes into the administrative penalties because by statute, the administrative penalty for an infraction cannot be larger than the fine that is imposed for an infraction. However, it does maintain the flexibility to allow it to be enforced either as an infraction or as an administrative penalty, depending upon which is found to be easiest for enforcement. The exceptions that have been written into this ordinance as to the facial covering requirement have been modeled off of those that are contained in the state orders. However, they are slightly more narrow. And in particular, with respect to a medical exception, it's limited to a condition or a medical advisement coming from a licensed medical professional, not merely that there be some related health problem. The fact that the elements don't line up perfectly does mean that there is a slight difference in terms of when someone might be guilty of an infraction versus when they might be guilty of the more serious offense of a misdemeanor. This would not eliminate the penalties for a violation of the state orders. This jurisdiction does not have the ability to override the state. It just has the ability to make a separate offense that would itself be punishable by an infraction. And then I also wanted to let the board know we didn't put a sunset date in this ordinance, so there were a few complications on that front. One of which was that if we tried to pick a date certain, there was virtual certainty that we'd have to change it down the road. So either that would be a reenacting of the ordinance to extend it or an early ending based on when the date was to be picked. And then if it were to be tied to the health order, we found that there were a lot of different variables that may come into play there, one of which would simply be if the health orders were to be modified but not rescinded, or if they were to be reinforced or re-upped in a substantially different form, would that trigger the sunset clause or not? So the way that it's structured as it is before you at this moment would have to be rescinded essentially at such time as the board determined that it was safe for people to no longer be wearing facial coverings. There's a couple of additional changes in the proposed ordinance that I wanted to draw your attention to. In particular, we removed the 24-hour notice period for non-commercial violations. That was at the request and suggestion of code enforcement. We also added the definition of enforcement officer in Ordinance 4461 had included anyone designated by the public health officer. And as a practical matter, the assignment of staff really falls more to the CEO, who is also the incident commander in this emergency. And therefore, we added some language that would clearly indicate that the CEO could designate any appropriate enforcement officer. If I may then go on just to the changes in the DA had provided. There were two whereas clauses where we referred to public context. The DA had suggested the term public settings instead as being more consistent with the language that they would be using in a criminal context. We made that change. There was a modification to the requirement in the definition of a facial covering where it indicated that the prior language had indicated that a facial covering meant a worn garment that covered both the face or that covered the nose and mouth. The new language is now that it simultaneously covers both the nose and mouth. And then lastly, there was a reference to the burden of proof being by appropriate evidence. It was intended to be appropriate to the particular context. The DA suggested clarifying that that be admissible evidence. We made that modification. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to see if Sheriff Kendall has anything that he would like to add in terms of the practical issues on enforcement and the proposed ordinance.
Sheriff Kendall.
Thank you, Chair Haschak, members of the board. Over the past several weeks, I've had a few conversations with many people regarding the enforcement of this. I have to give a shout out to Beth Bosk. She is constantly giving me good ideas. I spoke with her, and she doesn't mind in the least that I give her a little credit on this. Beth brought up an excellent point to me. She indicated when the seatbelt laws were enacted, many people received citations, but they were expensive to the point that they made the point. However, they weren't draconian. And they didn't carry with them the tremendous consequences that would hinder a person's ability and later in life and in their employment with misdemeanor violations and convictions. I believe in education-based enforcement. It's shown time and time again to be effective. And the goal is to achieve as much voluntary compliance as possible. It's based on affective learning. We have to continue focusing on education based enforcement while reserving misdemeanor, criminal, and civil regulatory citations for the egregious violations. There's always going to be those that are going to need a little bit harder push, and the ability to have a measured response is something that law enforcement has been battling with for years. It's a tricky endeavor, as enforcement relies on an agreement, and that agreement comes from the support of the public. And we have to agree that we will deal with laws in a fashion that meets the goals of everyone, and that includes the public. If we don't have a measured response, then we can see unrest and issues with prosecution. We can't be draconian. We have to be measured in these responses, and it's always going to serve us well. It gives us the ability to exercise discretion where it is needed, and in a short term, it gives us the ability to separate the sins from the sinners. Some people simply don't remember. I ran into a couple of youthful people in Mendocino last weekend who got out of their car and had absolutely simply forgotten to put their masks on. When I pointed it out to them, they ran right back and got them. The other thing is, these violations, if they're in the misdemeanor realm, they have to be carefully viewed by the DA as well. Currently, we have a lot to be concerned with the misdemeanor violations allowing for a person to have a trial by judge or jury. I don't want to speak for DA Eister. However, looking at the backlog in the court cases that are coming in the near future, I'm certain that we don't want to add more to that queue. And we have to remember that Mr. Eister represents 100% of the victims in our county. And it's my belief much of our safety in Mendocino County is based on the decisions that he makes on a daily and a weekly basis. In the past, the civil regulatory enforcement of the masking has required us to give 24 hours notice. And so we can contact a person and then we tell them you need to put on your mask, but we have to give them 24 hours notice. Getting rid of that gives us the ability to, separate the wheat from the chaff immediately. And the folks who are going to agree immediately, no citation is needed. It's the folks who decide that they won't. And, the fines and fees that were built into this, yeah, they're a little stiff, but at the same time, it gets the point across. I have concerns that a person who won't sign a citation, when that occurs, an arrest is the remedy. And I certainly don't want to see use of force issues stemming from infractions. However, the violator will be the person who ultimately makes the decision of what their fate is in these encounters. This, however, is changing from day to day as more education is going out and people are beginning to take this very seriously. We see the numbers rising while the death toll drops. But I think that when we look at this and we see that it's a lot of youth that are catching this, that's probably where we're going to need to give more education, possibly citations and things like that. Anyway, I wanted to thank you for listening to what I had to say on this and considering it.
All right, thank you. Let's see. So we'll go on to board comments. Supervisor Jurdy.
I think this was an excellent suggestion to, and I'm not sure who gets credit for it, but whoever came up with the idea to go to the infraction, it seems like it's much simpler to enforce and collect, and it gives more flexibility to all law enforcement. I know in cities there are often community service officers. Someone, it's a step below, maybe 2 steps below being a sworn officer. And I don't know if we have talked through the idea of how we would implement something like that in Mendocino County, but for the rural areas outside the cities, it seems like, and maybe in the cities, I'm just thinking that the county could step in with something like a community service officer that could be issuing this, because I think of this much like a parking infraction.
Okay, Supervisor Williams.
No comments.
Supervisor Brown.
No comment.
Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I would like a response of Supervisor Jurdy's suggestion that perhaps non-sworn personnel could issue this an infraction. Is that possible? I think we do see the requirement or the ability of the CEO to designate any county employee. So as an enforcement officer. So then presumably whoever is designated as an enforcement officer would then be able to issue citations. Is that accurate?
If I may, Mr. Chair. So that would definitely be the case with respect to administrative citation. I don't immediately know in terms of a citation for an infraction, although we can take a little bit of a further look at that if there's any additional requirements. But certainly as to the administrative citation, that is the intent, is to authorize it for non-sworn personnel. I would also just indicate, though, that as Sheriff Kendall alluded to earlier, there may be situations that due to non-compliance or sort of extreme resistance may require an arrest, and that would ultimately require a sworn peace officer if and when that situation were to arise.
Thank you. And we had an earlier report from John Martyr of the Special Investigations Unit, and in that he noted that he had talked with chiefs, I assume chiefs of special investigation units from 7 other counties, and he makes the point of those counties we're the only one that utilizes the Special Investigations Unit for public health officer enforcement. He says that all other counties are relying on a combination of public health officials, code enforcement, and the sheriff's office. Certainly, we do have code enforcement and the sheriff's office in the mix currently. And because we're such a geographically spread out county, I do think it's appropriate to also keep the Special Investigations Unit in the mix, but we should, I think, identify, do we have public health employees who could appropriately be designated as enforcement officers? Do we have environmental health employees who could be so designated? After all, the environmental health personnel do visit quite a few businesses to make various inspections and are able to issue violations. What I'm trying to do is broaden the pool as much as we can. We hear, particularly on the coast, that no one's available. Deputies, of course, can and have been responding. I think Sheriff Kendall has assigned them specifically to enforce the masking order, but that's always subject to what other calls are coming in that they have to be dispatched to. So I'd like to see us create as large a pool as we can of people who can be designated enforcement officers, so we get meaningful enforcement instead of just, it's great, we've adopted something additional on paper. So I guess boiling it down, the question is, could public health and environmental health employees, perhaps building officials, be designated as enforcement officers? Thank you.
Okay, should that be directed to?
Yeah, that's the question. And if we can do that, should we just write it into the ordinance?
County Council?
So in terms, I don't know that I can answer, for the various departments as to what resources they might have or who they might be available in order to assist on enforcement. But the language that we put in to the ordinance that allowed it to be any employee designated by the CEO was the intent to convey that level of discretion to the CEO to be able to use any resources that she has available. That essentially anyone, this would be the board authorizing the CEO to effectively designate any county employee or contractor as someone who may be able to issue an administrative citation in appropriate circumstances. And really, we were trying to provide language that would convey the relative breadth that this emergency seems to have required in terms of flexibility and discretion of the incident commander.
Okay, that's it, Supervisor McCowan.
One other question regarding the definition of facial covering, which is, somewhat tortured, and it does say everything but mask. And I think mask is the way probably most people generically refer to facial coverings. So could we say facial covering means any worn garment, comma, mask, or device? And so the only change there would be adding the word mask.
If I may answer that, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, certainly we could add that. I would actually suggest that if we were going to do that, we put it in the list of the such as a bandana, a scarf, a neck gaiter, or a homemade cover. We could simply add or a mask into that list somewhere.
Well, wherever we put it in there would be fine, except I hardly think a mask is a worn garment. So we're either, if we put it down with bandana, then we're saying it's either a worn garment or it's a device. It just seems, for clarity, we'd put it up early in the clause. Again, any worn garment, comma, mask, or device. I think it's pretty clear. Everybody thinks they know what a mask is. I would say the example of, let's see, including but not limited to a face shield, and then there's an example of a face shield, that's actually more limiting than what's out there. There are some that are not attached to a headband. They're actually attached to an eyeglass frame or eyeglasses. And so they don't cover what is described here. I suppose where it says including but not, this seems to define a face shield, and and what I'm saying, it's an incomplete definition of the types of face shields that are out there. Thank you.
All right. And I'd just like to say that in section 5B, this is for individual persons who willfully or negligently refuse to wear one of these face coverings. And so my concern with having people who aren't used to some kind of law enforcement giving out these infractions might lead to a confrontation quickly. We're looking at these amounts for the first offense not to exceed $100, second offense $200, third offense $500. Certainly it's needed, but I'd also like to pursue the other track that Supervisor Williams and I were on a call with Chamber of Commerce in Willits yesterday, and also Ukiah participated in it. And they had some great ideas. They came up with a plan for an ambassador program to work with people, to educate them and give them the reasons why it's necessary for the public health, for keeping our businesses open. And so I'd like to make sure that we continue in that vein too, as well as this infraction proposal. So with that, if there's no more comments from the board, I will go on to public comment, but I don't have any public comment registered. And so we will go back to the board.
Chair Haschak.
Oh, Mr. Chair.
And there have been some public comments, that certainly written comments. So I want to acknowledge those. And those were from, I'll read them off. So we have it from Dunlap, from Stein, from Stark, from Johanna, from Mangini, Bumbo, Diamondston, Bieber, Roberts, Arnold, York, Wigington, Krieger, Anderson, and Abel. Okay, sorry if I messed up anyone's name, but certainly that's a lot of correspondence on this issue. Okay, Supervisor Williams.
I move we adopt urgency ordinance amending ordinance number 4461 regarding administrative penalties for COVID-19 related violations and establishing an infraction violation regarding COVID-19 related facial covering requirements, and authorize chair to sign same.
Second for discussion.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would like to add the word mask, if we may. Again, I would suggest under the definition, facial covering means any worn garment, comma, mask or device.
I would accept that modification.
And I did have one more question I was just about to ask before we went to public. Couldn't quite get to the mute. But in the section that you just cited, Mr. Chair, referring to any individual to willfully or negligently refuse, does that limit the effectiveness of this if we say, because then we have to prove that they were willful or negligent? It seems like it creates a barrier to enforcement rather than just say for any individual to refuse. We don't care what their reason is. We don't care what their mindset is. If they refuse, they're subject to the penalty. Response to that, please.
Chair Haschek, you have DA Eister raising his hand.
Okay. DA Eister.
Thank you, Chairman. Supervisor McCowan, in the law, the word willful means intentional. And so it would generally be a general intent crime. So if you do it, then you're guilty of the crime. I don't think there's any impediment to you're either intentionally or negligently doing the act. So from my standpoint, this is a street discretion thing. Normally, I suspect that the good people of Mendocino County, when they're told about you need to put your mask on, they will. And the officer at that point moves on. So I don't think that creates an impediment, Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, District Attorney Eister. I have another question in that this ability to cite for an infraction appears to only apply to the individual not wearing a mask. So I've been in establishments lately where the employees are not telling people who don't have a mask that they must comply, let alone require it. They're not even telling them. And currently, by the shelter-in-place order, every business is required to verbally advise people that they can't come in without a mask. It doesn't require them to enforce that by denying service, and that's frankly another question. But if we want to have this infraction route available so that we're not perceived to being overly onerous and also not giving people the ability to insist on a jury trial, but treating it like a traffic ticket, why wouldn't we extend that option to a business that is not in compliance, either by not advising people or some other relatively minor violation?
If I might speak to that, Mr. Chair.
Yes, County Counsel.
Thank you. So if we establish the underlying offense as an infraction rather than as a misdemeanor, the state statute requires that the administrative penalty associated with that cannot be greater than the monetary penalty that would be connected with an infraction. So that would run counter to the other objective that Ordinance 4461 had put in place, which was to establish a sufficient financial deterrent for the businesses, which didn't have quite the same challenges in terms of enforcement. So they had a sort of a different set of issues related to them, but would allow the financial penalty of up to $10,000 per day for a violation of the commercial for a commercial activity after getting the 24-hour notice. So we would have to, if we were to modify this in a way that would make that commercial violation an infraction, we would lose the ability to have the higher monetary penalties there. And part of the motivation on that had been that there had been reports on the front end of all of this of businesses indicating that they would accept the fines as a cost of doing business rather than try to comply. And so that was the reason that distinction was set up in that particular way.
Thank you.
All right. So any further questions from the board? Comments about this? We have a motion on the table. We have a second. Okay. Everyone clear on what the motion is?
Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. Was that motion to approve the ordinance with the amended draft incorporating the DA's changes? And then was there also an accepted amendment to the motion to include the word mask between garment and or device under section 3G?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I would also, if the maker of the motion is in favor, include allowing county council to make any non-substantive changes to correct typos. For instance, there's one in section 5B where it says it shall be an A violation. So again, any minor little typo like that, they should be able to correct administratively, I would hope.
Agreed.
All right. Deputy Clerk of the Board, could you conduct a roll call vote?
Absolutely. Supervisor Brown?
Yes.
Supervisor McCowan?
Yes.
Chair Haschak?
Yes.
Supervisor Jurdy?
Yes.
And Supervisor Williams?
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
All right. And let's see. CEO Angela said that she had a meeting at 3 o'clock. I was wondering do you have a CEO report?
Not today, Chair Haschak. Thank you.
Okay. And then legislative platform, is there any report on that?
Not today.
Okay. And supervisors reports. Okay, we'll start with Supervisor.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I did have one item to raise.
About what?
Well, supervisor reports is often an opportunity to discuss timing of agenda items. And I do have what I think is a pressing matter. I'd just like to put it out there for the board.
Can you do it in your supervisor report?
Oh, well, I thought that's where we were, but pardon me if we're not.
Yeah, but I didn't call on you yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Supervisor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was on a call after our last meeting, the day after, and it was listening into the Citizens Oversight Committee. And I've also, since our last meeting, the 23rd, I've been on numerous Cal OES calls for state updates on COVID-19. I participated in a CSAC virtual program on Listos, California, and that was very interesting. Not sure if any of you know or not about Listos. And so Listos, California, basically the governor and state lawmakers together invested $50 million through urgency legislation, and that was AB 72, to establish the California for All Emergency Preparedness Campaign, which is now called Listos California. The campaign is to boost disaster preparedness among our diverse Californians by connecting them to competent support through a grassroots, people-centered approach. The campaign is anchored at the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. The partners include community-based organizations, community emergency response teams, the CERT programs, the 8-hour training program in English and Spanish called Listos, AmeriCorps NCCC, Fire Safe Council, and others. So Listos helps individuals, families, and communities prepare for disasters like wildfires, earthquakes, and floods. But they've also stepped up with many support material to respond to COVID-19. And basically, all the resources do come in a couple of languages. Well, more than a couple. I can think of two, that English and Spanish, that we would need in our county. But it is, they do have a website, and you learn more ways to protect yourself and your family. There's other materials for people with disabilities or caregivers of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But I found it very interesting, good information, went to the website, went all the way through it. So I encourage all of you to do it. And if we're looking for resources for certain individuals within our community, we can find it there. Thank you.
All right, and that's Listos at Listos, correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did request information from staff regarding timing of cannabis agenda items. And through October, I don't see any tentative date for the so-called new direction for the cultivation ordinance that the board has been discussing. And we did discuss it on June 16th. And I believe the direction was for staff to work on that while also pursuing the current ordinance to try and clarify things with CDFA and CDFW, but also to begin working on what would the new direction look like. And I think the expectation was that they would report back as soon as possible. I would certainly advocate, July 14th is not far away now, but July 21st would be an appropriate time. I know staff began working on this immediately after June 16th because I got inquiries from them requesting a document from CDFW that I had referred to. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't move forward with that discussion and be able to give direction to staff. It is a time-sensitive item in that the longer we take to give clear direction, the fewer people can participate in the cultivation program, and the less revenue the county will derive therefrom. Also, another part of that is the zoning tables. That's currently forecast to come to the board on August 18th. Again, pushed out pretty far into the future. We did have that item on the agenda on June 16th, but you as the sponsor didn't want to discuss it then. But now we do have that item is in the mix, albeit a couple of months out, and we've apparently not bringing forward the new direction issue. So hopefully that's simply an oversight, but could we have a response from staff as to when the board would see the item on the new direction or the cannabis cultivation ordinance? Thank you.
All right, and as chair, I'll respond to that we just had a meeting about forecasting and the agendas coming up. We are we're very booked with COVID issues and some others. And so we are trying to get these issues in, but we certainly have several cannabis related issues that are, need to be coming forward as soon as possible. It's just, and we need to bring those forward. We even have those recommendations that were approved by the board in February that still haven't come forward. So I was planning on doing an agenda item to have an update from Planning and Building, the Cannabis Department, about what's happening with our direction with, as you mentioned, Supervisor McCowan, and also what's happening with CDFA and CDFW. So I think that those are all appropriate, and I'll be talking with the clerk of the board to see how we can line these up properly.
Chair Haschak.
Well,
Supervisor McCowan.
I'll defer to Supervisor Williams. Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Williams.
Yeah, I support Supervisor McCowan's concerns. I understand that we're in a pandemic. We have limited resources. At the same time, this is one of the few revenue sources during the pandemic, aside from the visitor economy, which is at risk of closing. We have concerns about the environment, which can be mitigated by bringing cultivators into the legal regulated market. And yet in Mendocino County, we're up against a cliff. In 2022, there will be no outdoor legal cannabis in this county unless we make progress. And whether that's with addressing the ministerial permit concerns with CDFW and CDFA or moving to use permits, this needs to have started 6 months or a year ago. We're not going to get our people to a state annual license and the provisionals are expiring. This is a crisis level in terms of the cannabis ordinance. And I think it puts additional strain on law enforcement. We can't ask law enforcement to drive people into the legal cultivation process if there isn't one. And that's where we are today. There isn't an application process in this county. There isn't one in the works. There isn't one planned. We don't know where it's going. So I too share concern about kicking it down the road. I think we do need to address it. Maybe it doesn't need to be an all-day meeting, but we need to make some progress.
Yeah, and I'll check with staff and maybe we can have a special meeting just to deal with these issues that are piling up on us. So it's going to take staff in the cannabis department and everyone being able to have everything in order for us to make the decisions.
So Supervisor Haschak, perhaps could you tell us where that stands today? I think you may have more visibility into it, and it would help if the board as a whole knows which resources are limited. Where is the holdup? Is it in planning and building? Is it the clerk? What are we lacking to move this forward?
Well, I've heard that there's a holdup in county council being able to come back with those recommendations. There's a holdup in the cannabis department being able to bring those issues back to us that were brought up in June. And there's also a holdup in the staff from the clerk of the board's office. That there's just so much capacity in this time of a pandemic to deal with more board meetings. So we have a lot of critical issues to deal with according to the pandemic. And so we're trying to balance it out and figure it all, make it work for people. Like you heard from the CEO earlier, that people are maxed out. And so we're trying to make it work. But we need those pieces of the puzzle to come together.
Chair Haschak, could we consider outsourcing this rather than using county council? Could we hire outside counsel and say pay for it with the cannabis tax dollars? That way it takes 100% of the burden off of county staff, and yet we move forward. Unlike some of our other endeavors, this one has a hard deadline because there is a planting season. And if that's missed for a year, I worry we're going to see more people moving to the illicit market simply because we don't have a legal process.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think we're getting a little bit too much into the discussion of possible board action and what the board may want to do or not do on a particular item. This is Supervisors Reports. Supervisor McCowan was correct that there's generally some ability for the board to take up whether or not to put something on a future agenda, but at this moment, I don't know that we can get into quite this level of detail.
Okay, so my commitment will be to work with the clerk of the board and the cannabis department and county council to expedite these issues as quickly as possible.
And would that include a goal of bringing these items before the board on July 21st?
Well, I said I would work to do it as quickly as possible. Okay.
I'd like to request I'll request an update for July 14th to hear what progress we're making on being able to get these back in front of the board. They are time sensitive.
Very good. Okay, Supervisor Jurdy.
Yeah, since our last meeting, I've had quite a few small group meetings. I don't want to go into great detail on those, but they're on subjects, for example, with Supervisor Hashak and the sheriff and many others about, public safety, Citizens Advisory Committee that the board directed. And so we are making progress on that front, I think, all parties involved. Also, had some meetings regarding with the sheriff's office regarding the new jail project. They may have met with all or almost all board members on that subject. And I think we're going to have some new information coming in showing more accurate cost projections for going all electric, which is, in other words, very low carbon emissions if we go with that. Also, Sonoma Clean Power at our monthly meeting. I'll try to get something to the board. I realize we probably don't have board time to have a presentation by Sonoma Clean Power, but in normal times we probably would at least once a year have a presentation from them. I'll just say that I'll try to get some information to all the board members so you can get information out to your constituents about some new programs that they're launching here in Mendocino County. There's money available on the Mendocino coast and Sonoma coast for additional car charging stations. So that's good news. It could be on private property at businesses as well as public property. Also, they have some funds that will be available. I think it's zero interest loans for people who want to install batteries at their home to be prepared for power shutdowns. And anyway, there's a number of different programs they're launching. They're about to open up in downtown Santa Rosa their Energy Lab, which is basically a storefront where people will be able to see new technologies that will help reduce their energy consumption in their home or business. And they're working to develop some online kind of classes so that if you don't drive to Santa Rosa, and many of us have not driven to Santa Rosa for months now, would be able to at least see what's in that storefront from home. So anyway, those are just some of the meetings we've had since our last board meeting. Oh, and one more, the lodging group on which is countywide that's been meeting for months now about reopening, being prepared. They're very interested in partnering with healthcare providers in the county and the county to find funds for additional testing. And they're pursuing a number of options on that front. The scale the are hoping to bring to bear is not enough to fully pay for all the testing that we need and we want in the county. But I do appreciate their good efforts on that front, and want to make sure that they're coordinating with county staff and our healthcare providers. They're doing great work. Thanks.
And Supervisor Williams.
Nothing that can't wait for next week.
Okay, and same with me. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting at 3:19. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe and well. Okay.